The forest-covered mountains and foothills of Alberta's eastern slopes covers an area of approximately 90,000 square kilometers. The eastern slopes are treasured for the rivers and streams, the beauty of the scenery, and the habitat it provides for wildlife. This area is famous for its fishing, camping, hunting, and hiking opportunities, and grazing permits have allowed ranchers to feed their cattle off this land since 1915. The eastern slopes are home to grizzly bears, bighorn sheep, elk, and the West Slope cutthroat and bull trout, both species legally protected under the Federal Species at Risk Act. Alberta's headwaters are found in the eastern slope mountains and foothills that line the province's western border. The Bighorn region, where most of the North Saskatchewan River originates, Kananaskis Country, and the Ghost Watershed, which holds the unprotected portion of the Bow River's headwaters, Livingstone, Porcupine Hills, an area that feeds the Oldman River, and the Castle region, which houses the headwaters of the South Saskatchewan River. When the eastern slopes ecosystems are healthy, the landscape works like a sponge, holding, filtering, and carrying water. 90% of drinking water for Albertans comes from our eastern slopes. Everyone in Alberta, and many in Saskatchewan, depend on those rivers for drinking water, irrigation, and industry. A 1976 policy brought in by Peter Lougheed's government laid out how and where coal development could go ahead. Open-pit mines were prohibited over a large area, and mining was banned in the most ecologically sensitive environments. This policy came about after years of work and dozens of public consultations. Premier Lougheed had a very compelling vision based on input he received from extensive public consultations. His policy protected headwaters, wildlife habitat, and environmentally sensitive settings in the Rockies and foothills for decades.
Coal has a much more serious environmental problems. It destroys, most of it's located in some of the beautiful parts of our province and would affect, for example, our potential for recreation and tourism, so there's limitations on how much coal would be produced. If it's on the plains, it can affect agriculture areas. So there's cost benefits that are involved in coal production that don't exist in oil and gas.
On May 15, 2020, the UCP provincial government in Alberta rescinded this 40-year-old policy. It was done quietly on the May long weekend, without input from Albertans, including First Nation groups. The only group that was consulted by the provincial government regarding this change was the Coal Association of Canada. The abrupt rollback of the coal policy surprised many in Alberta, because the UCP election platform made no mention of allowing coal companies into the protected eastern slopes of the Alberta Rockies. To date, the government has refused to explain the full implications of rescinding this program. They have claimed that their goal was to modernize an obsolete policy. Albertans, they've said, have nothing to worry about because of the existing rigorous Alberta Energy Regulator review process. However, the Alberta Energy Regulator has recently become embroiled in a finance scandal for recklessly throwing $5.4 million at a project outside its mandate, and the Supreme Court of Alberta overturned the regulatory approval for a $440 million oil sands project that would have encroached on land a First Nation considers sacred. The AER is losing the ability to protect people, property, and the environment, and there has been talk about everything from gross mismanagement to alleged inefficiencies within the organization. Environmentalists find it disturbing that the current Alberta government is portraying the 1976 coal policy as archaic and outdated, when the vast consensus of ranchers and wildlife conservationists believe that it was far-reaching, progressive, and environmentally sound government policy ahead of its time. The Alberta government also wants to rewrite the rules on water use along the eastern slopes of the Rockies. Water use is highly restricted in southern Alberta due to concerns about supply in the most arid part of the province. Water licenses cannot be issued. They must be purchased from existing license holders on the open market. The new plan put forward by the UCP government would affect water taken from the Old Man watershed above the dam. Current regulations for the watershed stipulate that only a certain amount of water can be used for designated activities, such as irrigation, municipal water supplies, recreation, and a limited amount for industrial use. The plan the UCP government is proposing would eliminate these categories and set one overall limit, allowing industrial extraction to dramatically increase if coal projects are approved. To date, only 16% of the water can be utilized in this area, but under the new plan, that would quickly jump to 30% based on government presentations stipulating the possible approval of 2 coal mines in the region. If the communities in the eastern slopes of Alberta continue to grow, their water needs may no longer be met because of the vast amount of water used in open-pit mining. Ranching and tourism will also be adversely affected by this change in water allocation. The open-pit mines being proposed in the Alberta Rockies are metallurgical coal mines. Metallurgical coal is a grade of coal that produces good quality coke. Coke is an essential fuel in the blast furnace process for the making of steel. Only 1% of the carbon in metallurgical coal goes into making steel. The rest goes into the atmosphere as greenhouse gas emissions. So what is involved in open-pit mining for metallurgical coal? First, trees must be removed through the process of clear-cutting. The trees are usually burnt or dumped into adjacent valleys. In the higher elevations of the eastern slopes, there are closed mixed wood and coniferous forests, dominated by lodgepole pine. At lower elevations, the lodgepole pines continue, along with Douglas fir and trembling aspen. Once the area forest is destroyed, explosives are used to blast away rock and other debris, known as overburden. Heavy machinery will then remove up to 800 feet of mountain elevation to reach the coal seams. The land is carved up using a technique called cross-valley fill. The tops of coal-rich mountains are mined away through the creation of terraces. The remaining rock is dumped into adjacent mountain valleys, creating enormous waste rock piles. After the coal is dug from the mountain, it is transported by truck to processing centers where the coal is crushed and chemically washed. The coal cleaning process contains numerous chemical compounds. One of these chemicals, MCHM, which is used to separate non-coal components from coal, leaked into the Carlston, West Virginia water supply in 2014, polluting the drinking water for 300,000 people. Another chemical compound used in the cleaning of coal is calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is not considered a toxic pollutant in water. However, when calcium carbonate reaches a high enough concentration, it solidifies into calcite. Calcite coats stream bottoms and in effect turns them into concrete. Where calcite accumulates, the stream bottom becomes uninhabitable to invertebrates that form the base of the aquatic food chain. Aquatic plants are smothered, and trout that need to create hollows and loose gravel to lay their eggs can no longer spawn. This is especially devastating to cutthroat and bull trout populations. Once the coal is washed, it is loaded onto trucks, trains, or barges for shipment. The coal from the proposed mines in the eastern slopes will be shipped to China. Waste rock piles created by mountaintop mining are prime sources for selenium leaching into the surrounding environment. The long isolated minerals in the rock piles filter into the air supply through dust particles, and rain and snowmelt carries these chemicals into nearby rivers and streams. The water that emerges from the base of the valley fills becomes contaminated with these chemicals, the most abundant being selenium. Selenium is a naturally occurring chemical essential to human cellular function and is considered healthy in very small doses. But it can cause disease and death through constant exposure and is fatal to egg-laying animals, including fish and birds. Teck Resources operates 5 open-pit coal mines in the Elk River Valley of British Columbia, just across the Continental Divide from the Alberta Rockies eastern slopes. Selenium pollution from these mines has caused deformities and spawning difficulties in large populations of fish in the Elk and Fording rivers. A 2013 study of these waters by the University of Montana documented selenium concentrations 7 to 10 times higher than in normal conditions. In 2014, Teck Resources spent $600 million to try and reduce selenium pollution. One of Teck's first efforts was to build a cutting-edge bioremediation facility at the Fording River. However, soon after the plant went into operation, large numbers of native cutthroat trout were found dead, floating in the river. The plant was immediately shut down, and analysis showed that by removing one selenium compound from the water, the facility was releasing a more dangerous version of the toxin. The federal government's Department of Fisheries and Oceans fined Teck Resources $1.5 million for their mistake. In Sparwood, a community of 3,490 people, less than 2 miles from one of Teck's mines, selenium in the drinking water has reached contamination levels. The town pulled one of its water wells offline last spring when selenium exceeded British Columbia's drinking water standard of 10 micrograms per liter. Selenium has been measured as high as 13.5 micrograms per liter in Sparwood's water supply. An overdose of selenium in humans can cause nail discoloration and brittleness, hair loss, fatigue, irritability, and nausea. Longer exposure can cause disease of the liver, kidney, and lungs, as well as heart problems. At high enough levels, selenium toxicity can cause death. To date, there is no known technology or process that will remove all traces of selenium pollution from large volumes of flowing water, and there is also no solution to date for removing selenium from groundwater. West Slope cutthroat trout are native to the mountain and foothill streams of southern Alberta, within the Old Man and Bow watersheds. Teck Resources reported in the fall of 2020 that the upper Fording River near their mine in BC's Kootenay region had lost 93% of the adult population of West Slope cutthroat trout compared to 2017 levels. The juvenile cutthroat trout population dropped 74%. Selenium in waters where cutthroat and bull trout spawn can cause spinal and facial deformities, missing gill plates, and reproductive failure. Both bull trout and cutthroat trout are legally protected under the Federal Species at Risk Act. Selenium poisoning in livestock has been well documented and is a huge concern for ranchers who graze their cattle in the foothills of the eastern slopes. Acute poisoning is caused by the consumption of a sufficient quantity of highly seleniferous plants, which produce severe symptoms. Cattle and sheep are the most likely species to be affected, but it also affects horses, goats, and swine. Studies have shown that possibly as little as 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is the minimum dose that can be lethal in cattle. For horses, it is 3.3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and swine 1.2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Selenium from the soil is absorbed by plants, and when livestock eat those plants, selenium toxicity can develop. Typical symptoms of acute selenium toxicity include excessive perspiration, blindness, abdominal pain, colic, diarrhea, increased heart and respiration rates, and exhaustion. Death can occur quickly. Major concerns have also developed over the threatened grizzly bear population in the Alberta Rockies, where open-pit mining leases have been issued. Core and secondary grizzly bear habitat, as described in Alberta's draft Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan, identifies habitat security and connectivity as key for grizzly bear recovery, both of which are threatened by coal projects of the scale being proposed. Roads built by these mining corporations are damaging for grizzly bears. Higher road density leads to lower grizzly bear populations, a critical problem for a species still rebounding from a long period of decline. Not only do bears die near roads, but bears also avoid these areas, making many habitats with roads through them less effective for grizzly bear populations. Only by maintaining the integrity of their habitat will the numbers of this threatened species increase. Bighorn sheep are sensitive to mineral exploration and extraction. Road construction and harassment by low-flying aircraft can all be detrimental to bighorn sheep lambing sites. Habitat fragmentation and loss will ultimately lead to less stable populations of some bighorn sheep herds. Bighorn sheep have already lost critical winter range habitat in British Columbia's Elk Valley due to coal mining. In the 2015 Government of Alberta Management Plan for Bighorn Sheep, it states, Albertans care about clean air, reduced greenhouse gases, quality water, sustainable water quantity, healthy and sustainable lands, biodiversity, and conserved natural landscapes that support healthy ecosystems. To achieve these outcomes, the Department of Alberta Environment and Parks must work with Albertans to manage the cumulative effects of human development on the environment. Stewardship of the environment requires a collaborative effort by all Albertans. It is a shared responsibility among citizens, communities, governments, and industries, and is key to achieving an outcomes-based cumulative effects management system as a basis for attaining desired environmental outcomes. On February 8, 2021, Sonia Savage, the Alberta Energy Minister, held a press conference reversing her decision to rescind the 1976 Lougheed government's coal policy. For the people of Alberta who have been fighting the government over open-pit mines operating in the eastern slopes of Alberta's Rockies, there was a moment to celebrate, until Sonia Savage said this.
That means that the 1976 coal policy did not preclude coal lease exploration, and it also means that putting it back won't necessarily end exploration. Further, reinstating this policy does not affect current coal exploration and mining on any other categories of land. I will provide details on what the new coal policy consultation process will look like in the weeks ahead. Alberta has a rich history of responsible coal mining. It's been an important part of the province and important to its citizens for decades, with many Albertans continuing to rely on the industry to put food on their families' tables. Metallurgical coal projects, if approved through vigorous regulatory processes, can help Alberta businesses meet increasing global demand for steel and provide good-paying jobs for hard-working Albertans. And given today's economic climate, that's not something that can be taken lightly.
Sonia Savage also announced that the mining companies that received leases will be allowed to continue exploration of those lands in the eastern slopes. 6 companies still hold exploration permits, which allows them to perform hundreds of invasive new drill sites and kilometers of new and refurbished roads. Trespassing signs and fencing have already been erected in these areas, obstructing Albertans from exploring these public lands. On the Coal Policy Engagement website, the Minister of Energy states, "Feedback will help ensure coal development reflects the best interests of Albertans and continues to balance stringent environmental protections with responsible resource development." Her intent is clear. Coal mining in the Alberta Rockies is still being pursued by the UCP government. Public consultations begin March 29, 2021, but there has been no announcement on how these consultations will proceed and who will be allowed to testify. We may have won a battle, but the war continues.